this point in history, do you perceive transatlantic crossings as anything more than nostalgic?
No, because I think the ship offers a proper service. There are a lot of people travelling on here because they choose not to fly, and so it's a mixture, but it's still the classic transatlantic ferry. So it's not just nostalgia. No. It pampers to that, obviously, but it does offer a distinct service for people who want to go one way across the Atlantic.
What was it like to design a new ocean liner as a sort of cruise ship hybrid? And what about the process was similar or different from your previous projects?
It was completely different from the previous projects because a lot of the other ships are sort of proposed by the shipyards, and they're mostly variants of what's gone on before. When I was actually on board QE2 sailing transatlantic before Carnival announced that they were buying Cunard, and I was actually on the ship because I really enjoyed sailing on the ship, and there were rumours that it was going to be sold to Prudential. And I thought, now, what on earth is something like Prudential going to do with the QE2? So I thought, I must go on it one last time. And it was actually owned by the Caverna Group, which had the shipyards where we were building ships. And we were negotiating for various ships, and the same person was the chairman of Cunard. So I said to him, is there any chance of going back on board and doing some lectures? And they agreed to let me go, and it was on that trip that it was announced that Carnival had bought Cunard. And Mickey Harrison comes on the phone and says, I want you back in Southampton to start work on this new project. When can you get back? And I said, well, I can only get back when the ship arrives back. So that's how it started, and then drawing the first line on the piece of paper, and 5 years later handing this over to Cunard. The big difference in the whole process, though, is that I had to challenge the mindset that we needed a cruise ship and not a liner, and to get over this 40% premium, which is what's involved with the ship. And the way we had a meeting with the Carnival management, and they said to me, well, look at the Disney Magic and the Disney Wonder. You've got the black hull, the white superstructure, and 2 red and black funnels. Surely that's what we need. And I said, well, you could do that. You could build a tremendous ship. You could start operating it on the Atlantic from May to, say, September. But I said, if the ship's successful, you're going to want to expand the envelope of operation to April through to December, like the QE2 operated on the Atlantic. And I said, within that time, you're going to run across a huge storm where it's going to threaten the integrity of the ship. So if you do that, not only will you run the risk of discrediting your business, but you could physically put people's lives at risk. And then I showed pictures of the Michelangelo in 1966, and I said this was a fairly large Italian liner sailing to New York. Big storm, wave came over the forecastle and actually ripped open the front of the forecastle, and people were swept out and drowned. I said, there's no way I want to be part of designing a ship that's going to be like, if we're going to do this, we've got to have the big, strong, proper ship. And they eventually agreed. And it was showing on the Michelangelo that convinced them. So, yeah. And then came the challenge. The challenge Mickey gave me was that you've got to design something that will give me the same return on investment as if I put the money into cruise ships, because that's the only thing that I'm going to use as the benchmark. and so I had to completely rearrange how the transatlantic ships have been in order to maximise the balcony cabins. And so I did that by putting the public rooms down low, making them very high, and that serves two purposes. The first one is the public rooms look very grand and imposing, as they should on a ship like this, but then it elevates them sufficiently high so the very first passenger cabin deck can straight away be balconies. Otherwise you'd have to have a window, and you don't get the revenue potential from that. So by lifting them up so high, we started with the balcony cabins, and that's what made the mathematics work of the economics. And
as captain, what's the biggest innovations you've seen from the QE2 to the QM2?
Well, I mean, quite dramatic. I mean, one of the things that the perception of ships might be quite different to people outside the industry. You buy a car, and every day as you're driving into work you see the later model, and people change. But with the ships we keep them longer, but that doesn't mean the technology is not changing. The technology within the QE2 changed dramatically. The biggest engineering feat ever was the changing of the engineering plant of the QE2 in 94, wasn't it, or somewhere 86, sorry. So technology is moving on. So we have a lot more technology, a lot more type of computer systems operating this ship than we ever did on the QE2. But that doesn't mean Sal wasn't aware of them, because you're still reading the technical journals and keeping up with the system. So there's a lot of new innovations here, and perhaps the main one is the propulsion system with the pod system, which, to put it sort of very simplistically, is like having a couple of outboard motors on the ship. Well, 4 really, and that makes manoeuvrability far more easier. You can manoeuvre this ship far better than you could ever manoeuvre the QE2. So all this marine technology is moving on as we speak, and ships embrace it as we go along. And whilst Stephen says it'd be interesting to see what happens to this in 10 years' time, it's quite conceivable that other systems will come in and we will adopt them as we go along, just to keep the ship afloat longer. So the manoeuvrability is probably the single most different thing between the QE2 and this ship. The fact that you can turn this around on a pinhead, whereas that would be a bit more of a difficult task on the QE2. And up to very strong weather conditions.
Do you miss being captain, and was it like being on the ship in a capacity other than captain now?
No, I don't miss being captain. I enjoyed it while I was here. I enjoyed it right up to the moment I set foot on the land after leaving the ship for the last time. I had a good run in my life. There's always a time when you have to hand the reins over. There's a lot of young people moving up, and I think that it was the right time to go.
What do you foresee for the future of ship design and ship propulsion?
Well, certainly it's going to be a challenge, because there's all the new regulations coming in for fuel, and the price of fuel is going to continue to increase and the like. So huge strides have been made in the last 10-15 years, where they've been doing a tremendous amount of model testing on that to try and get the most efficient hull forms and the like. And we're particularly fortunate on here in that, because she's such a fine hull, she's very, very efficient. It's the more blocky type of sort of the big cruise ships. I'm not going to say any names, but there are ones out there that are much more sort of squared off at the front and the stern, below the water as well as above. Say here, she slips through relatively easy, but there's going to be progressive work done, like this air injection system, where they're going to put a layer of air around the hull to see if it smooths the ship. So there's a lot of work being done to try and keep that under control. One of the things I shall say tomorrow in my lecture is that you can only, I think, move forward if you've got an appreciation of what's happened before. And when you look at our stern on here, a lot of people say it's a really odd stern because it's the cruiser stern and a transom moulded together, so it's a hybrid. Well, I got the idea of doing that from the Oceanic and the Eugenio that was in the mid-60s. And the cruiser stern is very good for the sea keeping when the ship's pitching, because the rounded shape deflects the water away without a big sort of hammering effect. But you need a small transom section to give you the hydrodynamic efficiency. Costanzi, the naval architect in the 60s, merged the two together on those two ships. It worked fine, but for some reason it was never used again. But I thought, well, let's try it on here, because I didn't want a great big flat transom. I wanted the rounded bit, and we tried it, and it works fine. A lot of it is fashion, of course. Like our bow is the classic clipper shape. You look at the Victoria and the Elizabeth, and the bow goes the other way. It's more like a sort of spoon type bow. And I know what I prefer, but it's just fashion.
Out of curiosity, why is the Queen Elizabeth not the Queen Elizabeth III?
We named the ship Queen Mary 2 because we wanted to carry on what still are amongst the most famous initials ever to go to sea, that was QE2. And when we were building this ship, Carnival Corporation wanted to replicate as much from QE2 into Queen Mary 2. So we named this ship Queen Mary 2 in order to carry QE2, QM2, the initials forward. But that was the first time Cunard had ever done that with QE2. Like we've had 3 Coronias, we've had 4 Carmanias, we've had 2 Mauritanias, but none of them ever had 2 or 3 after the name. So what we did was basically with the Queen Elizabeth, we went back to Cunard tradition was not having a number. So like QE2, the QE2 name is always unique in Cunard history. The Queen Mary 2 name is unique in Cunard history. But yeah, it's as simple as that. It's either consistent or inconsistent, depending on which way you see it, but that's why we didn't have Queen Elizabeth 3.
With the success of this ship, do you see ocean liners beyond this one even?
Something I learnt from doing this is never say never.
No.
That's the thing. You should certainly, you've got to have that vision.